Hello! So today I'm going to be talking about Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, woohoo! One of my favorite books of all time and also a classic work of literature. Jane Eyre is written in 1847 by Charlotte Brontë. Before we talk about the book itself, I want to talk just a little bit about what comes before Jane Eyre. So fairly soon before Jane Eyre, you have Jane Austen's works of literature published, including Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is published in 1813. Sense and Sensibility, Jane Austen's first published novel, was 1811 that it was published. So Jane Austen comes before Charlotte Brontë and her two sisters, Anne and Emily Bronte, who are also very well-respected authors in their own right. I mentioned Jane Austen because Jane Austen published anonymously. So at that time, early 1800s and before that, it's not really considered feminine to be writing a novel. So it's considered very uncouth and out of the realm of possibility to be in the public sphere, very unfeminine, and many female authors were looked down on. So Jane Austen publishes anonymously, and after her death, her identity was revealed. Charlotte Brontë and her sisters don't publish anonymously, but they do publish under pseudonyms. So they publish under pen names. Charlotte Bronte's pen name was Currer Bell, and you'll notice that her initials are the same either way, CB, Charlotte Brontë, Currer Bell, and same thing with her sisters publishing under pen names as well. So it's still considered a great act of courage and very much out of the norm for a woman to be writing something and publishing it when Jane Eyre is published. Something else that comes before Jane Eyre and is very important and influential in the novel are fairy tales. So this is the Brothers Grimm collection, and then this is an Andrew Lang collection of fairy tales from around the world. The Brothers Grimm wander around Germany collecting fairy tales that were told orally for years. So they're recording in the 1800s and they're writing down fairy tales that are really much older, that come from a very long-standing oral tradition. They're told out loud. So just be mindful that fairy tales are very old and they do play a significant influence in many works of literature, including in Jane Eyre, and you'll see some of those connections. Okay, so what comes after Jane Eyre? It's a very influential novel. Two of the books that I am always reminded of when I read Jane Eyre, Frances Hodgson's Burnett's A Little Princess and The Secret Garden. Secret Garden takes place on the Yorkshire Moors, which is where the Brontes lived, and many of their novels also take place. So you'll notice a lot of misty moor settings, a little bit rustic and rural. And there's a rumor that A Little Princess was actually based on Emma, an unfinished manuscript that Charlotte Brontë was writing. So something to keep in mind as well. A few other things that Jane Eyre influences or is mentioned in. So it's mentioned in Beastly by Alex Flynn. It's mentioned in Peaches by Jodi Lynn Anderson. I got a major spoiler because I read both of those books before Jane Eyre. And it also influences things like Rebecca. So this is the Alfred Hitchcock film Rebecca, but the Daphne du Maurier novel Rebecca is influenced by Jane Eyre as well. And it also influences a lot of young adult fairy tales. Gail Carson Levine, the author of Ella Enchanted, mentions Jane Eyre a few times in her blog, and I see a lot of similarities between those two books in certain sections. And Shannon Hale, the author of The Goose Girl, also mentions Jane Eyre as one of her favorite novels, and she even talks about a character in the second book in the Books of Bayern, Enna Burning, and she talks about how that character's name is influenced by a character in Jane Eyre. So I thought it'd be fun to just go through a little overview and where Jane Eyre kind of stands in the literary tradition. Okay, so we're going to start reading Jane Eyre, published 1847. I usually warn my students that if you're reading a classic work of literature, you want to skip the introduction. Normally, when publishers write an introduction in a classic work, they're assuming that you've already read the novel and you're familiar with the plot and therefore won't be scandalized by any spoilers. So if you have a copy of Jane Eyre that does have an introduction by someone who's not Charlotte Brontë, I would advise you to skip it. But Charlotte Brontë published a few prefaces before the editions of Jane Eyre that were published while she was living. So if you read those prefaces, those are okay. So I am not spoiler filled. So I'm going to read the preface of Jane Eyre. First, we have a dedication to W.M. Thackeray, Esquire. This work is respectfully inscribed by the author. Thackeray was a famous Victorian novelist as well, and he wrote Vanity Fair. So Charlotte Brontë dedicates her novel to him. Preface. A preface to the first edition of Jane Eyre being unnecessary, I gave none. This second edition demands a few words both of acknowledgement and miscellaneous remark. My thanks are due in 3 quarters. To the public for the indulgent ear it has inclined to a plain tale with few pretensions. To the press for the fair field its honest suffrage has opened to an obscure aspirant. To my publishers, for their aid in their their tact, their energy, their practical sense, and frank liberality have afforded an unknown and unrecommended author. The press and the public are but vague personifications for me, and I must thank them in vague terms. But my publishers are definite. So are certain generous critics who have encouraged me as only large-hearted and high-minded men know how to encourage a struggling stranger. To them, i.e., to my publishers and the select reviewers, I say cordially, gentlemen, I thank you from my heart. Having thus acknowledged what I owe those who have aided and approved me, I turn to another class, a small one so far as I know, but not therefore to be overlooked. I mean the timorous or carping few who doubt the tendency of such books as Jane Eyre, in whose eyes whatever is unusual is wrong, whose ears detect in each protest against bigotry, that parent of crime, and insult to piety, that regent of God on earth. I would suggest to such doubters certain obvious distinctions. I would remind them of certain simple truths. Conventionality is not morality. Self-righteousness is not religion. To attack the first is not to assail the last. To pluck the mask from the face of the Pharisee is not to lift an impious hand to the crown of thorns. So you may be able to assume from this intro that Jane Eyre kind of caused a little bit of a scandal. There were a lot of critics of the book, particularly critics of the morals they believe that the book espoused. So just be aware of that. And little hint is that she writes, conventionality is not morality. So following convention or following expected procedures is not necessarily doing the right thing or the moral thing. And then she makes an allusion to the Pharisees, who in the Bible are always saying very high and mighty things, but not really practicing what they preach and certainly not doing what they do from a place of caring. These things and deeds are diametrically opposed. They are as distinct as is vice from virtue. Men too often confound them. They should not be confounded. Appearance should not be mistaken for truth. Narrow human doctrines that only tend to elate and magnify a few should not be substituted for the world-redeeming creed of Christ. There is, I repeat it, a difference, and it is a good and not a bad action to mark broadly and clearly the line of separation between them. The world may not like to see these ideas dissevered, for it has been accustomed to blend them, finding it convenient to make external show pass for sterling worth, to let whitewashed walls vouch for clean shrines. It may hate him who dares to scrutinize and expose, to raise the gilding, to show base metal under it, to penetrate the sepulchre, and reveal charnel relics. But hate it it is indebted to him. Ahab did not like Micaiah, because he never prophesied good concerning him, but evil. Probably he liked the sycophant son of Chinah better. Yet might Ahab have escaped a bloody death had he but stopped his ears to flattery and opened them to faithful counsel. There is a man in our own days whose words are not framed to tickle delicate ears, who, to my thinking, comes before the great ones of society much as the son of Imlah came before the throned kings of Judah and Israel, and who speaks truth as deep, with a power as prophet-like and as vital, a mien as dauntless and as daring. Is the satirist of Vanity Fair admired in high places? I cannot tell, but I think if some of those amongst whom he hurls the Greek fire of his sarcasm, and over whom he flashes the leaven brand of his denunciation, were to make his warnings in time, they or their seed might yet escape a fatal Ramoth Gilead. Why have I alluded to this man? I have alluded to him, reader, because I think I see in him an intellect profounder and more unique than in his contemporaries. yet have recognized, because I regard him as the first social regenerator of the day, as the very master of the working corpse, who would restore to rectitude the warped system of things. Because I think no commentator on his writings has yet found the comparison that suits him, the terms which rightly characterize his talent. They say he is like Fielding. They talk of his wit, humor, comic powers. He resembles Fielding as an eagle does a vulture. Fielding could stoop on carrion, but Thackeray never does. His wit is bright, his humor attractive, but both bear the same relation to his serious genius that the mere lambent sheet lightning playing under the edge of the summer cloud does to the electric death spark hidden in its womb. Finally, I have alluded to Mr. Thackeray because to him, if you will accept the tribute of a total stranger, I have dedicated this second edition of Jane Eyre. Currer Bell, December 21st, 1847. One other thing I should mention about the pseudonym, the pen name Currer Bell, is that with a first name Currer, most people would assume that Charlotte Brontë was a male author. So again, something to keep in mind. So that's the preface to the second edition. Kind of calls down some harsh words of criticism against her own critics, and then dedicates the book to Thackeray. Okay, there's one more little note to the third edition. I avail myself of the opportunity which the third edition of Jane Eyre affords me, of addressing a word to the public, to explain that my claim to the title of novelist rests on this one work alone. If therefore the authorship of other works of fiction has been attributed to me, an honor is awarded where it is not merited, and consequently denied where it is justly due. This explanation will serve to rectify mistakes which may have already been made, and to prevent future errors. Currer Bell, April 13th, 1848. So those are our two little prefaces to Jane Eyre. I hope you enjoy the book itself.